Hi, Councilor Arroyo.
Hey, good afternoon.
Afternoon. So I have you down as kind of walking through the major changes first. Yes, sir.
In terms of what we're going to do first?
Yeah, so just making sure. So I have you as the kind of kicking us off, walking us through the changes, the history, background, and summary of amendments. No?
I mean, I can do that. I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but I can do that.
I hope that wasn't just me. Okay. All right. Councilor Arroyo?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, so back again, sorry. So we can walk through, I guess, together, the kind of summary of the amendments. I think they're in red in the copy that you have.
They are.
Okay, perfect. And then by that, I mean, we'll just walk through, we'll fill in each other's gaps if we remember what the discussion was behind them. I have some notes on them. And then the administration will go to discuss I think they had a half dozen edits, questions to deal with in blue. That's on the copy that we all have. And then we'll have a last call for any questions, suggestions afterwards. But I think it makes sense to just walk through it all versus having the conversation on each and every single one point. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works fine for me.
Okay, perfect. All right. I'm gonna just, okay. Just you and I right now. All right, well, I'm gonna give it 5 minutes or 3 to 5 minutes, just maybe someone tried to log on and there was the technical difficulty. But thank you all for being here.
Hi, Christina. This is Chantal. I don't know if
Yep.
Carrie. I just see a couple of my folks on the attendees list.
Yeah, Carrie's gonna bring them over.
All right. I didn't flag Nigel Jacob, so if you could bump Nigel and Nayeli Rodriguez, that would be great. Because their names weren't in the email that I sent you this morning.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. So great.
Okay, I know we've been joined by Counselor Braden, and we have Counselor, one of the lead sponsors, Counselor Arroyo. So we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna do the formalities, hope more counselors sign on. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It's Thursday, October 7th, and we're here today for a virtual working session on Docket 0397, Ordinance and Surveillance Oversight and Information Sharing. This matter is sponsored by Councilors Ricardo Arroyo and Michelle Wu, and was referred to the committee on March 3rd, 2021. This matter is a refile from last year, and the committee, Docket 0684 at the time, and the committee held a hearing and working session on this matter in 2020. The committee also held working sessions on April 22nd and August 19th of this year. In accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, we're modifying our open meeting laws to allow for us to have this working session via Zoom. Public may watch this working session via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and on Xfinity 8 RCN 82 Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov. This legislation establishes standards for surveillance oversight and information sharing. The docket requires community involvement when surveillance is used and when the city acquires surveillance technology. The legislation limits information sharing between Boston Public Schools and Boston Police Department. As initially filed, the legislation required that the mayor establish a surveillance use policy that applies to every city department and that the city council approve the policy. Based upon testimony from previous hearing and working sessions, there are proposed language changes to the docket which would narrow the scope of the surveillance oversight provisions to apply to 6 city departments or entities as follows: the Boston Police Department, Boston Parks Department and Park Rangers, Boston Public Schools, Boston Public Health Commission, Boston Housing Authority, Boston Municipal Protection Services, and the Office of Emergency Management. Changes to the definition section and applicability clauses to the surveillance oversight portions clarifying which departments would be affected have been added, as well as changes providing certain exemptions to the Boston Housing Authority and the Boston Public Health Commission. There's also an addition to the exception section for technology used to track equipment and vehicles. Participating today on the administration's behalf are David Ingalls, who is Chief of Information Officer, DoIT, Christopher Carter, co-chair of New Urban Mechanics, Samuel DePina, Director of Operations of BPS, Superintendent Paul Donovan, Chief of Bureau of Investigative Services for the Boston Police Department, Laura Siegel, Chief of Staff for EMS, Superintendent Benford, Office of Emergency Management, Deputy Nancy Anderson, Office of Emergency Management, and Neva Coakley-Grice, BPS Interim Division Chief of Student Support. She'll join the Zoom hearing to provide support if needed. Also joining the committee, the hearing today, Valeria Dovali, as Student Immigrant Movement, Cade Crockford, Director of Technology for Liberty Program at the ACLU Massachusetts, Liz McIntyre, Staff Attorney, Director of the School to Prison Pipeline Intervention Project at Greater Boston Legal Services, Elizabeth Badger, as Senior Attorney at the PAIR Project, and Nora Paul Schultz, from Unafraid Educators. I'm going to turn it over to the lead sponsors and any counselors for opening remarks. And then, as I said, this is a working session. So Councilor Arroyo and I will walk through the major changes that have happened, which are, for those of you who have the document, in red. And then the administration will walk through the updated changes or suggest changes in blue. And then we will see how, I guess, the advocates and the lead sponsor, I should say, a response to those, and then we will go to see if there's any other additional edits or amendments, if you will. So Councillor Arroyo, I'll kick it to you, and then I believe we've been joined by Councillor Braden. And I think that is all for our councillors right now. If I'm missing anyone, my apologies. I'm just checking. Okay.
So no opening for me. Just want to get straight to the work. Ready to get this done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor Braden.
Good morning. No opening for me this morning either. Just happy to be here and we'll continue to follow along. Thank you.
Okay. So this is hopeful. This is our final working session and a final call for departments to provide feedback after very extensive process. This again was submitted in May 2020. We had a hearing in November 2020, and then working sessions on December 2020, April of 2021, July 2021, August of 2021 scheduled, and then today in October. So I hope that means to most people how serious we're taking this and how much we feel the back and forth and community feedback is key to this. So this is, one second. Sorry. So we're going to now kick it over. The lead sponsor and I will walk through the major changes in red. I don't know if everyone should have a copy of this. So we can go ahead and go through it. Oh, and we've also been joined by Councillor Flynn. Councillor Flynn, we, for the most part, skipped opening remarks. I don't know if you had any.
No, I'll hold off, Councilor Edwards. Thank you for your leadership on this important issue. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Okay, all right then. So folks, we have the legend in front of us. Councillor Arroyo, ready to go?
Yep.
Okay.
So are we going to do a screen share? Are we just going to go? Because then I'll just, if we're not doing a screen share, that's fine. I'll just say the number like 1663
I think
The screen share might make it easier.
you're right. Let's see. Can you share yours, or do you want me to share?
I can technically. Maybe easier if we can get somebody from Central to share.
Christine or Carrie, can you get the legend up? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, we're good to go. All right. So go ahead, kick it off, Councilor Arroyo, and we'll just go through the red edits right now. These are the back and forth from advocates and from previous working sessions.
Perfect, and that this makes it easier because now I can just say, so the first edit that you see there adds the words "while allowing for appropriate use to assist in the charge of improving delivery of services and public safety." This was a request from BPD, which we've incorporated into the purpose. So that's the first red edit. 1663.2, the definition section. We removed technology used. Here you'll see we removed by any city department, and instead we specified specifically by the following city departments and agencies, which is an addition. It's in blue. You'll see that so let me do this in the red and then I'll go to the blue. By the following city departments: the Boston Public School, the Police Department, the Boston Police Parks Department, Park Rangers, Boston Public Schools, Boston Public Health Commission, Boston Housing Authority, Boston Municipal Protection Services, and the Office of Emergency Management. That was so that we could make it clear exactly who this applied to. The city in their blue edits added the "and agencies" to specify that BHA and the Boston Public Health Commission are semi-autonomous agencies in the city, and we're okay with that change. So that's that first page there. All right, so this is the Surveillance Oversight Advisory Board. If you remember, or you've been tagging along to these working sessions, we had sort of, one was called the working group and then the other one was called the working group, but they both had very different goals. So this one we changed to the Surveillance Oversight Advisory Board because it's a permanent structure in the way that it's created. The working group, just really quickly for folks paying attention and trying to know the difference, the working group was something that the city wanted to do, which we applaud. of having all of these other agencies sort of and departments come together and figure out how they could sort of do better with surveillance oversight and come to some findings within like a specific amount of time and then disband. The Surveillance Oversight Advisory Group is a group that's going to be comprised of 5 individuals, 1 representative to be chosen by each of the following: the president of the city council, the Massachusetts American Civil Liberties Union, the Boston Police Commissioner, and 2 representatives that'll be chosen by the mayor. We made changes specifically here as to what their qualification should be for the ones selected by the mayor. At least 1 should be an academic representative with expertise in technology and public policy issues. And the board shall serve as an advisory body to further discussion and provide recommendations on surveillance issues to the mayor. So that's what that is.
Thank you, whoever expanded the screen. Appreciate that.
Very helpful.
Great.
Thank you, whoever that was. Central staff is great. So the applicability section here, which was something that solved many edit problems because it made it clear that who these all apply to. Again, touches on all of the departments that we would like it to do. We took out the only here and made clear for the purpose of the section, the word city shall mean all the city departments and agencies listed above. So those are the changes there on applicability. Here, we added this section, so the following situations are exceptions and exemptions from this ordinance. Number 1, we added this to specify which departments will be under this part of the ordinance. And so that's what that is. Sorry, the part above it. This part is the changes that are new. So we're okay with this change, but we want to change accepted to exempted. So if you notice the rest of the sentence is blue. It's blue because it's a new edit since the last working session. So if you're paying attention to this, the blue is a new edit. Red means it's something that we've already discussed, has already come up at the last working session or in the past. We're okay with this change, except we want to change accepted to exempted.
Except you want to change it to what? I didn't hear that.
So where it says accepted, we want to change that to exempted.
Oh, okay.
So it says are exempted. You'll notice there's an exempted next to it in red. So if you go down to C, this is a suggestion. If you remember the last working session, there was a lot of conversation about GoPro footage. This was added to sort of address that. The administration had issues with excluding promotional videos and GoPro footage. We specified that it is for non-law enforcement and no investigatory purposes. So that's what this edit does. Do you want to come back to the blue later? Because these are all their new stuff. So just let's go down.
Yeah.
So here there's an O here, which is devices exclusively capable of detecting radiation. We changed this because the administration and BPD requested some exceptions. So we made it so that it only applies to tech that can only be used to detect radiation versus multifunction tech that can do radiation detection, but also something else. So instead we made clear that if it only detects radiation, then it's exempt. I think the next one is number 4. Yeah. So there's some small gender non-conforming language there that we fixed. So that's that first edit. One second, let me just get my notes here. So the administration and BPD wanted this. This is part of the advisory board that will make recommendations to the mayor. If we decide as a council to not approve a surveillance technology purchase, then what would happen is if the city council does not approve the use of the proposed new surveillance capabilities, that request that they made to us that we voted to not approve will then be sent to the Surveillance Oversight Advisory Board, which we detailed above. They'll make recommendations to the mayor about what could be changed or made to bring it in line. Subsequent to receiving the recommendations from the Surveillance Oversight Advisory Board, the mayor may at their discretion resubmit a modified request to the City Council for approval. And this is something that the Surveillance Oversight Advisory Board is a BPD administration request. So that sort of gives them a way to continue to make the request, but with feedback from the council in an advisory board that does have folks appointed to it by the mayor, the city council, and the police commissioner. Under that is the surveillance use policy. Same thing. Basically, the administration and BPD requested this. We added language to create a process by which, after rejection, the tech can be sent to the advisory board, which will then study the problem that we bring up or that are brought to light as to why it was rejected. And then they'll recommend action to the mayor, and then the mayor can resubmit to the council for approval. If you remember, the major issue here was confirming, which was confirmed at the last working session, that they weren't simply looking for a loophole or a workaround where the city council could say no to something, they'd send it to this board and this board would approve it. Instead, what they made clear and what we've made clear in the follow-up as well is that this board is an advisory capacity to help them put together a solid proposal if the proposal that they put forward gets rejected, or to amend or to give suggestions to the mayor and the police if it's from them, or the administration if it's from them, specifically some agency, how to correct it so that we can finally approve it. So if you go down, and last again on the 4 here, this is a request that they made that the administration and BPD wanted to put a 60-day timeline on approvals and add a process by which tech can come back before the council. So we added language to create a process by which, after rejection, the tech can be sent to the advisory board, which will study the problem, recommend action to the mayor, and the mayor can resubmit for approval. And this also adds that 60-day time limit. So the city council shall vote to approve or deny the surveillance use policy by the vote of a simple majority within 60 days of submission. So that gives the council about a 2-month window to look at something, approve it or deny it. 1A. So this is another administration BPD request. We added language to create a process by which, after rejection, hold on, am I in the same place?
Yeah, it's D1A, and then.
So it's basically the same thing. It's exactly the same idea as before. It details further the process by which they can resubmit a modified request and go to the Surveillance Oversight Advisory Board. So that's what that is. This is another continuation. If you go down to C, you really should put page numbers on this. C, B, C, there it is. Administration and BPD wanted to put a 60-day timeline on approvals. That's what this is. And then it also, again, explains the way in which it goes to the Surveillance Oversight Advisory Board. So then this is 1663-4 is where we are. There we go. We're in the BPS section of it now. And with B, this is a BPS requested change. They wanted us to strike true and, so we did. So it's a credible threat to the safety of the school rises that would amount to criminal conduct.
Thank you, Counselor.
Yeah, no problem. C is another change that they wanted to make that we agreed to here, which is a student is in possession of firearms and ammunition, which was their request. I believe it was a BPS request. It might have been BPD and BPS, but basically they wanted to make it clear that if a student was found in possession of ammunition, that is another thing that could be stored and shared in the student report. And so that's an addition that we made here. If you see D, this is the same thing. This one was a student unlawfully possesses or uses controlled substances, provided those substances are not marijuana, nicotine, and alcohol. And then the addition here at the request of BPS was and further provided, however, that a school police officer may collect, store, and share information pertaining to unlawful distribution of alcohol or marijuana when a student has unlawfully distributed marijuana or alcohol on school grounds in excess of the following amounts: 30 grams for marijuana and 1 liter for alcohol. So those edits were added at the request of BPS and BPD. If you go down to 5, this is very smart language change, actually. So thank you to BPS for this. This is a BPS request that reports which involve allegations of parental household abuse may also be withheld from students' families if disclosure of the report is not in the best interest of the student, which I think makes perfect sense. In cases of allegations of parental household abuse, a copy of the report shall be provided to the student or a trusted adult of their choosing. And that's simply to protect students from having, say, reported some kind of parental abuse towards them and then having their parents instantly informed within 24 hours that that report has been made. This instead will give a report like that directly to the student or an adult which they've trusted and explained to BPS they're comfortable with having it shared too. So that's that change. If you go down, so this is the transmission of information pursuant to exigent circumstances. This is a change we made for BPD, who wanted this ability. What we've done here is we said within 24 hours after the conclusion of the exigent circumstance or within 24 hours after BPS personnel, which is already part of the original language. We've given them a window here, a 24-hour window in which the student and their family does not need to be informed. We figure because the informing of a family and students is pretty pressing, we wanted to make sure that we didn't completely create a loophole in which that never happened or it didn't happen in a timely fashion. But we did give them 24 hours after the conclusion of the exigent circumstance to reach out to that family and that student. So we've created an exception there at the request of BPD. The next big one is I. This is a whole paragraph around state mandated reporting, just to ensure. I'm not sure that this ordinance would have in any way, shape, or form interfered with state mandated reporting, but this is just to make clear that it doesn't. So nothing in this section shall be construed to prevent or restrict reporting requirements around sexual assault, sexual abuse, and child abuse in accordance with Massachusetts general laws. Mandated reporting, obviously, is something that teachers have to do in instances where they're aware of these things. And so this is just to make clear that nothing in this ordinance interferes at all with their or is construed to prevent or restrict any of the reporting requirements. Underneath this is the annual surveillance report. You can scroll down. This is pretty simple. The first thing under that. So if you go down one lower, 1663.5, you just scroll. I don't know if I'm frozen or if it's just not moving.
No, it's not moving.
Not moving.
Okay, thank you. I'll just keep going because this part's, there we go. This part's pretty simple. It's just the applicability. So this goes directly to who this applies to, makes it very clear, spells it out right there. The following city departments and agencies. And that for the purposes of this section, the word city shall mean city departments and agencies listed above. So that's all there. And then just to be clear why we added the for the purpose of this section word city, we added this to avoid having to specify the Boston Housing Authority and the Boston Public Health Commission each time we speak to city departments, which is exactly the same as the edit we made earlier in the document. It just gives consistency throughout. If you go to B, we made the timeline here. This was a request for more time by the city. They originally, I think originally this was 12 months. They wanted 24 months, but we believe because there's a lead into implementation, 18 months makes more sense. And so within 18 months of the effective date and annually thereafter, that's the change. The only change here is the lead-in where we've expanded the amount of time at the request of the administration. I believe this was specifically a BPS request for the expansion of time. And they also have the lead-in time for when this takes effect. So it amounts to quite a substantial amount of time. If you go down to D, this is again a request by the administrations to amend this in some way, and so we did. This just creates a process, or adds language rather, that creates a process by which after rejection, the tech can be sent to the advisory board, same advisory board we just talked about above, which would then recommend action to the mayor, and then the mayor can resubmit for approval. So it gives them the ability to have something that we reject go to that board. If you go down, I'm gonna skip past the blue. 1663-9, which is the very end of the document. This is the working group. So this is, as we said before, they had been calling both of these a working group. To me, and I think to everybody else, this felt more traditionally what a working group is, because it's not permanent. So that is essentially what a working group does. They work and then they complete their mission and they finish. So this section was initially suggested by the Office of New Urban Mechanics, and it's a good idea, so thank you to them. It creates working groups specifically that will be tasked with identifying a set of priorities, implementable objectives to increase the transparency, accountability, and engagement around the public deployment of technology and use of data within the City of Boston departments not covered by this ordinance. If you go down, they had originally written that a representative from the community at large with no process for selection. We added that the individual be selected by the student immigration movement. And so that's SIM for folks that are there. The reason it's just SIM here is because we spelled out the organization higher up in the ordinance. If you go down to the last one, which is F, it says the working group seat shall be filled within 1 month of the ordinance passage, and the group shall convene its first meeting 1 month thereafter. This is our suggestion to make sure that the group is filled quickly and the recommendations are not delayed. And so that allows for them to start that process. That's the summary of pretty much all of the changes that have been suggested, that we've worked through. I think we've had 2 working sessions on this. And so a lot of this, the bulk of this came out of the last working session we had, which if folks don't remember, Madam Chair went over for us to get through. And so we've got most of these in. So thank you for that, because most of these edits, most of this work was done then, and that's where it stands now. There was some blue edits in here. Those are edits that were submitted post that working session, post all of these sort of changes we've already made.
Good afternoon, Council Hall. It's Chief Coakley.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Councilor
thank
Edwards,
you.
how are you?
Good, good. Are you going to walk us through the blue edits?
I didn't expect it, but I do have
Oh,
some
no,
other
I mean,
edits.
sorry.
No, just some other edits that, so since,
we went through the red edits, and then the administration, whoever is going to represent the administration, will go through the blue edits that came in, and then we are opening it up for folks to also suggest some things.
okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay, so who from the administration is going to walk us through the administrative newest edits?
So for the new edits, it should be Chief Superintendent Benford. We also have Joel here. If there's any questions for BHA, we also have Nancy Anderson here for BPHC.
Sure, then, so,
For the newer edits, the latest ones that we sent out, yes.
Exactly.
Mhm.
so why don't we then start with, I think the majority of them began on, so who's walking us through these suggested edits?
Madam Chair, could I, just a point of clarification, this is Shemaine Benford, Emergency Management.
Uh-huh.
I will be presenting specifically as it relates to suggestions and edits from OEM. So I won't be presenting as a whole, but just to provide some clarification on behalf of OEM. And I believe Joe Wool is on for suggestions and edits on behalf of BHA.
Okay, So then I will just go to blue lettering and ask who put the edits in, and they can explain them. So the first set of blue, oh, 1 second, yep, if you can go back up. Thank you so much. The first set of blue edits we have, Council Royo, I think, suggested that this was something for the administration, just clarifying a little bit of the exempted language. Anyone want to discuss that? Okay, we're just going to continue on to the next set of blue edits. All right, well, this is where majority of them are. First set being on K. I think this is BHA, so, and okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the council. I'm happy to take this one. It's BHA and the Health Commission. I'm not sure if Tierney is on, but I do see that EMS is on as well. They may also chime in. There we go. So I'll just say briefly, and then if the Health Commission wants to add as well. This is really just for, these edits are really for consistency. I know that there's language in many parts of the ordinance in terms of using, quote, city departments to refer to departments and agencies. We weren't entirely clear that this was the case for this section. So the additions here would just be for the similar purpose as the city might use it. Cameras just audio visual feed, right, to protect just the city property. Similarly, the BHA, and I gather the Health Commission thought there were a couple of areas where that would be important for property that is not actually owned by the city of Boston. And it's mirroring the exemption. I think, for the BHA's purposes, I'll just say that there are certainly a lot of requests from residents, from abutters, sometimes from public officials to make sure we can provide public safety there. The cameras that are in use, and to the extent that they're added, they're really external to the building or entryways and access points. So I would not interpret this language to permit more extensive either audio video use that implicates resident privacy or alternatively for other functions, right? Which I think this section clearly states that if there were added capacities or features that would then, that's above the level of the exemption here. So I think I'll stop there, and unless there's any questions and from the council, or if the Health Commission wants to iterate any other point.
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tierney Flaherty. I'm the Director of Intergovernmental Relations at the Boston Public Health Commission. I'm here with Laura Siegel from Boston EMS. So similarly to BHA, just wanted to kind of reaffirm that, Boston Public Health Commission is an independent public agency created by an act of the legislature. So the edits we requested here under sections K, M, and N are just to ensure that these exemptions also apply to Boston Public Health Commission and Boston Public Commission property in addition to the city. Happy to answer any questions on that.
Chair Edwards, if I might, I'll just say that at least for the ACLU's part, we don't have any objection to this change.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and I would just say, which, maybe this specific group should have been handled together, but if you go up to applicability, we added for the purpose of this section, the word city shall mean city departments and agencies listed above, so that we wouldn't have to because it's big, right? These are the 1 through I think we went through most of the alphabet, to not have to add in all of the repeated references to the BHA and the Boston Public Health Commission. Instead, we just made the applicability section very clear that it shall mean city departments and agencies listed above, and agencies obviously being the BHA and the Boston Public Health Commission.
And Office of Emergency Management.
And Office of Emergency Management, exactly.
So, okay then, so
basically, so that there's not so many words, we just changed it in the applicability.
you're like 22 pages. I don't want to hear about too many words.
You have to keep saying over and over the BHA.
Okay. All right, but there's no opposition though if they have those edits or?
No, I think we tried
Okay.
to incorporate it in the applicability that way so that we wouldn't have to do it this way.
All right, so, MNNOP, who we're discussing radio frequency identification scanners that and tracking by the Boston Public Health Commission.
Hi, Laura Siegel from Boston EMS. Good afternoon. I'm the Chief of Staff at Boston EMS, which is a bureau of the Boston Public Health Commission. As you can see, we are requesting an additional item to be added to the list of exemptions in this section. Specifically, we are looking to exempt radio frequency identification or RFID technology used by the Boston Public Health Commission for disaster patient tracking. This is a narrow use of specific technology for a particular purpose. Boston EMS is charged with the responsibility of patient tracking during mass casualty incidents, natural disasters, mass meetings, declared states of emergency, and for certain special events under a regulation adopted by the Board of Health on October 1st, 2009. Boston EMS first implemented a regional patient tracking system in 2007 using a unique incident-specific number assigned to patients to log their location at each point of care from on scene to the hospital. Boston EMS used the system in a number of circumstances, notably to support injured runner tracking at the Boston Marathon, which proved valuable for supporting family reunification in the immediate aftermath of the 2013 bombings. After extensive research, Boston EMS determined that RFID readers installed in ambulances could be used to track disaster patients assigned wristbands with RFID chips for the purpose of logging their movement from the ambulance to the hospital and into the regional patient tracking system, freeing up EMS resources in this time of critical situations. We received approval to use Urban Area Security Initiative funding to procure RFID readers for installation in our ambulances. The proposed RFID complement to the patient tracking system is currently out to RFP with the expectation that the selected vendor will interface with the existing emergency tracking system. The use of the technology is consistent with existing privacy practices in the healthcare industry, and the association between the RFID chip number and the patient's name will only be made in the HIPAA secure regional patient tracking system. We would also request specification that the ordinance does not extend to include a department's ability to track its own assets, such as vehicles or equipment, that should also not extend to tracking of patients during emergencies. Thank you.
Are there any thoughts or response to that? Just P?
No opposition to P.
Okay,
Chair, likewise, the ACLU doesn't object to this either.
all right. Q.
Good
Oh, wait.
afternoon, Madam. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and respective members of the council and other parties. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of the conversation. With regards to Shumay Benford, Office of Emergency Management, I'm joined with Nancy Anderson, the deputy in the office. And with respects to Q, we raise the Office of Emergency Management as an exemption here with regards to camera access during partial and or full activations. Based on how we operate the Emergency Operations Center, we as a matter of general course of business don't day in and day out utilize cameras on a consistent basis. However, when we do operate and activate the Emergency Operations Center, it is generally tied to some major event that has citywide and or regional implications, such as the marathon and or major storms or major events. And during those activations, what we rely on is a slate of cameras that are identified by the lead agency, and in most cases, it is the police department, in identifying which cameras are going to be viewed based on the intelligence and the impact area for which we're going to be activating and or activity is going to be taking place. So it is very narrow in scope. When we activate the EOC, it is cameras that are identified through relevant real-time information in terms of which cameras we are going to be viewing. So we raise this as an exemption from a standpoint of real-time access and how we actually use the cameras when we are activated under an EOC activation.
Yep, I see you, Kate.
Thanks, Chair. So this is one that we at the ACLU strongly object to. So as many of you remember, recently there was some controversy because a journalist discovered that the Office of Emergency Management was planning to offer or had put out an RFP looking for bids that would, among other things, connect all of the cameras in the regional network and create the technical capacity for police officers from other jurisdictions to access cameras in Boston. And that set off a lot of alarm bells among privacy and civil rights advocates, probably for obvious reasons. The purpose of this ordinance is to provide the public as well as residents, our democratically elected representatives on the city council, the opportunity not only to understand how surveillance systems work in the city of Boston and who can access surveillance data under what circumstances, but also to exert a measure of democratic control over those processes. So those decisions are not made behind closed doors by administration officials without any public input or oversight or accountability. So, I just want to make sure that people understand in the administration that this ordinance will not preclude the sharing of camera data under certain circumstances. What it will require is that the city tells the council and the public what those circumstances are, right? When the city will seeks to make camera access available to folks at the Office of Emergency Management, the Emergency Operations Center. So in other words, we'll require that there's a public framework that's approved for that kind of information access, not that in each individual instance, when the cameras need to be accessed, the council has to approve that individual request. So in other words, it's the creation of a framework and the approval of a framework instead of a requirement that each individual time the EOC wants access to view a surveillance camera, they have to go and get approval for the council. So, for those reasons and others, we strongly object to this.
And would it be consistent then with the following section number 3 that basically allows for the exigent circumstances and then review after the fact anyway?
That is certainly our view, that the ordinance already bends over backwards to provide the opportunity for, emergency access without, even in ways that violate, the agreements that the council has already approved.
So to the Office of Emergency, to the EOC, I'm not sure if you were familiar with the next section, but it does allow for temporary, just go ahead and using in exigent circumstances. And then, of course, a report that comes after the fact. So I see you, Councilor Flaherty has also joined us as well. I didn't know if you just wanted me to acknowledge Councilor Flaherty, if you want me to direct in for an opening statement, or if you had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to get a specific example of sort of what we're talking about here. We're talking about sort of the emergency management sort of during the parade celebrations, for example, where, there was video surveillance of folks climbing up on light poles and smashing windows and stuff like that. Or is this sort of related to the function of Bragdon Street, which is sort of the epicenter of emergency management? So I guess prior to the ACLU being on, I got on and I cut the tail end. And I just want to if you can just give me a couple examples of where we've used it in the past for me to make sort of a determination as to whether or not it's sort of which box it fits.
So
Sorry, ma'am.
I just want to be clear about what we're discussing. This is not as in this particular exemption to this, we're talking about exemptions, total and complete situations and exemptions from the ordinance. And right now, for exigent circumstances, which whatever you want to be described it as, there is a whole section dealing with that camera footage or acquisition of surveillance technology in an emergency situation. That's the following section. And what we're debating in Q is the suggestion from the Office of Emergency Management that there should be a total exception to this ordinance for cameras access during any activation or monitoring period for public safety purposes. And that would mean that there's no access to that information because we're exempting it from the ordinance. And what I'm suggesting is that, or what I'm noting is that this ordinance already deals with exigent circumstances in the following section that allows for our Office of Emergency Management, and BPD to move if they need to, with technology if they need to, but they need to then turn around and report that. So my question was, isn't that meeting the need of the moment for public safety purposes or exigent circumstances? That was my question.
Ma'am, if I could add for the benefit of the chair and the councilor, just by way of example and additional testimony, I think it's also important, to provide those real world examples in real time, practical ways in which we have to use the center. And I think to the councilor's question around exigency, I did note that following section, and I believe exigency speaks for itself. But there are times when public safety and using those cameras are equally as important, that in the moment of planning does not meet the level of exigency, but nonetheless doesn't undermine the importance of it, i.e. the marathon. So it's important and critical that we have that technology and use it for activations during an example like the marathon, where we're working hard and endeavoring to prevent that exigency. And then there are those unfortunate examples where we know history tied to the marathon can give us an example of an exigency when we need it instantly and need to have it. So those are just, again, two practical examples of how we use it for pre-planning of major events or a major city, and also recognizing that following section around exigency.
Yes,
And also,
I'll direct you to the definition of exigent circumstances in the ordinance. Exigent circumstances are defined as exigent circumstances means the police commissioner or the police commissioner's designees, good faith and reasonable belief that emergency involving danger of death, physical injury, or significant property damage or loss, similar to those that would render it impracticable to obtain a warrant, requires the use of surveillance technology or surveillance data it provides. The use of surveillance technology in exigent circumstances shall not infringe upon an individual's right to peacefully protest or exercise other lawful and protected constitutional rights. So it's defining it as a good faith, reasonable belief that an emergency of danger of death, physical injury, or property damage. I think that that would come under and include the public safety concerns that you have. Again, it's not stopping access in that moment. What we're saying in the exigent circumstances section is that there would be a report and transparency after the fact.
fair enough. And there are no questions, certainly from our seat, with regards to reporting and accountability. And I appreciate your clarification with regards to exigency and the definition under the language to, various different applications of exigency, but I respectfully, understand and appreciate your clarification on exigency as it relates to this. Typically, it's more in the moment as opposed to pre-planning, but I do appreciate your explanation of that, ma'am.
Thank you. I have Cade raised her hand, and then Paul Donovan Donovan raised his hand.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, I just wanted to state again, because maybe I wasn't super clear the first time I tried to say this, that the ordinance does not require the city, any part of any covered entity, to go to the council each time it wants to use or share surveillance data in a way that's been previously approved by the council. So another way of saying that is that if the policy, the surveillance report, the description of the surveillance technology that is provided to the council that is approved includes something that says the Office of Emergency Management's Emergency Operations Center shall access the surveillance cameras during large-scale events when, a wider security response is necessary throughout the city, and that policy is approved by the council, You guys don't have to come back to the council every year to get approval to allow access during the marathon. You have it. You've gotten it. That's it. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
Thank you. Thank you. And Superintendent Donovan? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you, Counselor. My camera's not working for some reason. I apologize. I want to thank everybody for, the amount of work, the time and effort that's gone into this. It's been a process we've all been working through, and I appreciate the changes that have been made. The department has suggested, but this discussion on exigent circumstances and the cameras just raised a question for me. So, it's by the definition means the police commissioner or commissioner's designee, good faith, reasonable belief, the emergency involvement, exists. So now with the cameras, if we have another city department that has cameras and the police commissioner determines its exigent circumstances, is that other department, city agency or department, by the ordinance, they have to comply with the police commissioner's decision. This is exigent circumstances, and then provide access to the cameras. Is that what we're saying here? Because I don't want to get into where we do the police department. So now we're in a situation of exigency, and yet we have, say, another department head saying, this doesn't come,
Well, it does allow for the police commissioner or the police commissioner's designee. So if the police commissioner were to say, and I'm making this up, the chief of OEM's emergency Monday response, I'm just making it up. If they were to say that, I think that this ordinance allows for the police commissioner to say this person can make that good faith decision.
okay. All right, thank you.
I would agree with that.
Superintendent, if I could just ask, is your question, a tad bit deeper than that, just unturning a layer? Are you asking that from a standpoint of the police commissioner or his or her designee being able to direct that and have the authority over another city department as well and making that decision over their camera network?
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. In exigent circumstances.
So again, this isn't stopping the cameras from working in that moment. This isn't allowing for the commissioner to say you can or cannot turn your cameras on, or that you can or cannot access a special something in this moment.
Right. I think maybe the question is whether the commissioner has the legal authority to direct or order another city department where he or she doesn't ordinarily command or run or isn't the chief executive, right? And that may be the question.
So it's not a direction to the department. It's a direction to transparency. And we're providing a standard that we would think would be fair for city departments, that the police commissioner or their designee would say, this was an exigent circumstance. This was not an exigent circumstance. For access to the camera footage after the fact.
I guess ma'am, I guess that could possibly be considered, possible an area of further clarification and or authority granted to the commissioner to ensure that those departments are binding to abide by it. I know typically when we talk about the police commissioner or his designee, it's usually directing within the department as opposed to externally outside the department.
I think, so in terms of this ordinance, it is giving a certain level of authority, but standard bearing in that decision with this ordinance. I think, and again, it's not about the operations. It's really just the camera footage and whether there was an exigent circumstances or not for you to use a new technology that wasn't approved. And it's after the fact, and it doesn't prevent you from doing your job in any way, shape, or form. I understand you're saying, can they direct or not direct? They wouldn't be. They would say it's exigent or it's not.
So ma'am, if I could, okay, thank you.
Counselor Flaherty, and then then Joel will raise their hands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if Superintendent Donovan can just stay with me on this one. So I just want to see how this would play out sort of in the Amy Lord situation or the Olivia Ambrose situation, where in a relatively short period of time, Boston Police and other cooperating agencies had to pull together video from a whole different variety of sources. Obviously, there was city cameras, housing cameras, bank cameras, etc., to be able to catch who brutally murdered Amy Lord and to catch the predator who had kidnapped Olivia Ambrose. So again, real time, in a short period of time, a collaboration of efforts was able to pull together footage to be able to bring Amy Lord's murderer to justice, but also to find Olivia Ambrose alive. Does what we're doing here, does any of that impede any of that ability to do that? I guess is my question. We've talked about the marathon. We've talked about parade celebrations. I don't want it lost on anyone here that September 11th was launched from Logan Airport. All of that aside, in those particular two cases, Amy Lord and Olivia Ambrose, would this impact our ability to get that information quickly to either make an apprehension and/or to find someone kidnapped alive in a timely fashion?
No.
Chair Edwards, could I address
No.
that? Okay.
No, it does not. Again, this is about the transparency after the fact. That would be, I believe, clearly an exigent circumstance, and there's deadlines set in here for how we would know that information was ultimately acquired after the fact. It's a transparency ordinance. It's an ordinance about how we're being watched. And then if there is any proactive aspect of this ordinance, it's if and when BPD or other aspects of the named organizations, named agencies wish to acquire additional surveillance technology. That has a process for public discourse in this that is proactive. But in the moment, with the cameras that are already existing or with whatever technology is already existing, or they acquire something new, in the moment moves. And that this does not change that. But there will need to be an explanation as to what and how people were watched and how we got there to the public if there's this new technology that doesn't exist and was used to monitor and survey.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. No, very helpful. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I'm just going to keep going in order. So I had Joel and Cade.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a bit revisiting the something we were discussing a moment ago, but just to some of the discussion with Chief Benford and Superintendent Sullivan regarding the exigent circumstance, because I understand that there's an intent to align the external separate agencies with city policy wherever possible here. And I think BHA is happy to be a partner with that. But just one other thought on this is, right, so we have a separate housing police. The chief of housing police doesn't report to the police commissioner. I think we would similarly, in the spirit of sort of supporting the mayor's office of complying with this, also want to be transparent wherever possible. But there is a little bit of question of the structure of authority in that, just given that there's just a bit of the chain of command is a bit different, and it's a police. There's certainly an interaction there, but just that it may be, anyway, I'm not sure if I should belabor the point, but just maybe that there's a number of segments here where, to the sponsor's point, that it's sort of listed as any city department, meaning department and agency. In this case, it's very specific to the police department, which it does run a bit parallel to external agencies' security staff.
So we've been joined by Councilor Wu, by the way. My apologies for not recognizing her earlier. She is also one of the co-sponsors for the legislation. And maybe it would do us some good to just go through this section on exigent circumstances, where it explains the 30-day after the fact transparency, and that the BPD or agencies can seek an extension even after that, if they are in the middle of, I think we noted that there's sometimes investigations that last a little longer and footage that is still being reviewed and technology is still going on, to allow for the investigation and for the surveillance to continue. So I just wanted people to know This was absolutely discussed thoroughly in the last working session, which was almost 4 hours, where we went through this a great deal. And that's the next section, number 3. But again, there's 30 days where the commissioner or the reporting agency would just give a technology-specific surveillance use policy within 30 days at the end of the exigent circumstances. Let me repeat, at the end of the emergency circumstances. So it could be that it is longer than when the moment happens, that 30 days after it ends, there needs to be a report given, and that there could still be an extension given if necessary. So there is absolutely the ability to move effectively, efficiently, and with tools that are necessary at the moment. You just need to submit a report after the fact. I don't know, Cade and then Laura, excuse me.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think I understand what Joel is saying, which is that the exigency framework is fine. It sounds like what he's worried about is that because it specifically names BPD and the Boston Housing Authority Police is not a part of BPD, that it might need to reference the Boston Housing Authority Police as well, so that they have the same exigency authority. And the ACLU does not object to that. So I think the way to address that concern would be merely to add where it says BPD may temporarily acquire. You could say BPD and the Boston Public Housing Authority's Police Department may temporarily acquire blah, blah, blah. Or you could just, put something at the top of section 3 that says, this subsection is applicable to, the exigencies subsection is applicable to the following entities, right? I think that's the concern, is not so much what the exigency means, which is like, it sounds like everybody's cool with that. It's more just like who it applies to. And the ACLU does not object to adding the Boston Housing Authority's Police Department there. We're fine with that. Joel, does that address your concern? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I see that the Health Commission may also want to weigh in on this, but I guess I would just also point out that some parts of this we are complying basically because of a request from the mayor's office that would come to us. So if the intent is for external safety agencies to provide a similar level of disclosure, then because the city doesn't regulate our procurement process, it may just be, or acquisition, purchasing, et cetera, it may just be valuable for that to be clearly stated. And then for the chain of command for seeking that is also mirrored.
Yeah, so Laura, I don't know if you were going to say the same thing, but we don't object to including the Health Commission's Police Department there either.
Yeah, and thank you, Joel, for raising this, and thank you, Cade, for just laying it out so clearly. For us, it's the same issue where we completely understand and appreciate the provisions of this section. We'd just like to clarify that BPHC Public Security, along with BPD, can temporarily acquire this technology in exigent circumstances.
There seems to be no objection to that from Kate or the lead sponsor, right? Okay. All right. Sorry, I'm on mute. Okay, so then as it relates to Q, I think the discussion has really said that it would fit better under the exemption that's already there for exigent circumstances for Q, which was asking for a total exemption for OEM and public safety purposes. I think.
Yeah, I would have opposed Q as a amendment to add. So I think exigent circumstances deals with that.
Okay, moving on to R, Mayor's Office of Emergency Management. Goods and services purchased by OEM in its role as a fiduciary and administrative support for the Metro Boston Homeland Security Region on behalf.
And my apologies, ma'am. That was That was an oversight that wasn't caught through the multiple eyes on it, but in essence, it was the exemption is being asked for on behalf of the OEM and its role as fiduciary and administrative support for the MBHSR.
So you were asking for a permanent and total exemption for all your goods and services
As
purchased
it
by OEM for Metro Boston Homeland Security Region.
That is correct, ma'am. And the reason for the ask is based on how the office is constituted, which may be a separate conversation, but this office is a City of Boston department, but it also has a dual mandate of supporting as the fiduciary and the administrative support for the MBHSR, which includes 8 other jurisdictions. So the provision where it talks about the acquisition of surveillance and technology could adversely affect other cities and towns that are party to that region. I would point out 2 things for the body. One, that 90% of the funding that supports OEM as a department comes through those resources. And we also disclose all of the projects that are approved under that year's grant authorization during the accept and expend hearing.
So then so to me, then you're already complying then if you're already exposing or explaining what you're purchasing. So the exception would actually take you away from that obligation.
No, because I mean, we go through the accept and expend hearing. My concern is that by having us blanketly covered under this without some level of recognition of the role that we play in supporting the region, that it could adversely affect the ability of, based on what our mandate is, the ability of the region to procure certain goods and services that may have benefit outside of the City of Boston, i.e. in one of the other 8 jurisdictions.
Sure, could I speak to this issue?
Sure.
So the ACLU strongly objects to this exemption, this blanket exemption of OEM. One of our primary concerns, I mean, among the reasons that we elected to include and the sponsors elected to include OEM as one of the agencies that is covered by this ordinance, is the fact that there is effectively no real oversight of what goes on through the Metro Boston Homeland Security Region surveillance acquisition process, principally because of its distributed nature, right? It is a multi-city engagement, and that is part of what concerns us. We don't have a county government in Massachusetts anymore. So in some other states where these grant programs are operational, there's a county government that has elected officials that can review at a county-wide level, what the plans are for surveillance and information sharing, how much money is being spent, whether the technologies are performing as desired, whether there's a public safety benefit to the use of the technologies, whether civil rights and civil liberties are being violated, et cetera. But we don't have a county government in Massachusetts. And so there is no way for anybody really who's an elected official to have meaningful control over what's going on here, except for the mayor of Boston. And of course, the goal of this ordinance is to redistribute some of that authority and transparency to the city council, and therefore to give members of the public more access and more control over what's going on in our communities. So the vast majority, at least as far as I understand, of the surveillance technology that's operational on the streets of Boston comes through this very program, the surveillance cameras, the shot spotter devices, et cetera. And so if the council were to elect to exclude OEM from the requirements of this ordinance, it would effectively be excluding from the requirements of transparency, accountability, and oversight the vast majority of surveillance that takes place on our public streets, and that's why it's untenable.
Thank you, Kate, for sharing that information. And again, I just point out that we do have the accept and expend hearing. And, while in some instances, depending upon who's having the conversation and what the context of it is, the construct and the way that our office is set up may not be ideal, but nonetheless, that is one, one dynamic that we have to manage too. So it may be a broader conversation that, that enjoys the benefit of, other areas and other amendments that may take a look at that, but that is our reality. And again, I point out the accept and expend and the ability of the region to be able to move forward and having a conversation around what might be appropriate, management of the region could be a separate conversation, but that is our reality.
Superintendent Donovan?
Yes, thank you. I think I've made this point before, but just so things that go into this ordinance, particularly here, aren't just going to affect the city of Boston. So, post 9/11, there was the recognition that, the city of Boston and the surrounding community needed to kind of join forces to protect not just the city, but the region. That has since, expanded to just, well beyond terrorism into, all the crimes that affect us from, drugs, robbery, murders, just about everything. We work day in, day out with all the surrounding communities. They've joined with us in a partnership. So this ordinance is going to affect that partnership because it's going to restrict what these other communities can do within their communities if they are not, because the funding is just going to be limited because it's a group thing. So what this potentially can do is break down that partnership that we have, and Boston will be an island unto itself, fighting against crime on its own without, the cooperation of our neighboring communities. It's just, I can foresee that happening here. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So specifically then on the letter R, I don't know that I understand, and I think all law enforcement to a certain extent has regional relationships that they have to have. I don't, again, believe that your ability to purchase impacts, to be transparent about what you're purchasing, and to have that go through a public process well in advance, in any way, shape, or form, it impacts the regional relationship. So I'm trying to understand, again, the BPD doesn't even have an exemption for the goods and services purchased by them. I don't know how OEM can get a permanent exemption for everything for goods and services as part of their regional relationship.
Ma'am, I would only put out that BPD does have strong relationships, but they don't have that organizational mandate across the 9 jurisdictions. And based on the way, this is a City of Boston ordinance. So if in a worst case scenario, technology wasn't approved to be purchased, but it, under the spirit of partnership, as the superintendent mentions, does that hold up the entire purchase for the entire region, as opposed to a posture or position that says that Boston is not going to participate in it, but because of our mandate, we may be procuring resources and goods that benefit the entire region, and that's the larger concern. And I do share and concur with the superintendent that the implications, on our ability to maintain those strong partnerships that help us secure our city and region could be, adversely affected as a result of it. But that is the concern: is that this is a city policy, but we are procuring resources on behalf of the region when we're asking.
I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Cade and the lead sponsor.
Thank you, Chair. So just to address that particular concern, again, the purpose of including OEM is to ensure that there is a measure of public oversight of how these funds are being spent. And this is a lot of money also. This has been hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars over the past approximately 20 years that have led to a really vast expansion of surveillance of people's public movements here in the city of Boston. So, you know, if there's a situation where OEM comes to the council and says, we would like to obtain, you know, X number of surveillance devices, you know, here's how we plan to use them. And the council says, you know what, we actually don't want that to be used here in the city of Boston, but we're not going to stand in OEM's way if it wants to obtain this technology and give it to the Quincy Police Department, for example. That's something that the city council could absolutely do. So, you know, I think this worst case scenario idea that subjecting OEM's spending of federal dollars to city council approval in the area of surveillance would lead to a crisis whereby, you know, the Metro Boston Homeland Security region would not be able to provide technology to neighboring communities is not really based in reality. I would also just reference, for those of you who might not know, that 2 of the communities that are in the MBHSR, Cambridge and Somerville, have also passed ordinances like this. And one of the problems that we've run into in implementation in those communities is that Cambridge and Somerville don't have oversight power to control how OEM does its business. So it really is incumbent on the city of Boston, I think, to take responsibility for its leadership of this program. And I think a really important part of that is to subject OEM's spending, particularly in the area of technologies that are going to impact Boston residents, which again are substantial, to the very kind of oversight, transparency, and accountability that we're talking about. And I just want to again say, none of this is determinative in the sense that, you know, the ordinance doesn't say you can't use this technology or you can't, you know, use it in this way. It merely says you have to get the city council's permission to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Kate, if I could, ma'am, I would just say, I think, Madam Chair, I think that's helpful context, Kate. And if I could advocate, I think that it may be helpful and really proactive to say that. I think that there is trepidation with our partners as based on the language and how it's constructed. And we have had some recent experience with this, over the summer, but I think it could be helpful to proactively say that. And again, in the spirit of transparency and accountability, we are fully in support of that. But I think we should recognize our partners on the other side of the table and do consider the implications across the board. But simply saying that, adding some language could potentially offset some of the concerns that we're anticipating as challenges.
Thank you. You may want to suggest what that language would be. You can send that in an email. I think Councilor Arroyo, then Superintendent Donovan.
Yeah, and I just want to make clear, because Kate and others have already handled this, but the entire purpose of the surveillance or oversight ordinance for me is to protect the constitutional rights and the privacy and things that folks are entitled to in the city of Boston, residents of the city of Boston, my constituents. An argument based around what happens in Quincy or what happens in Revere or what happens in Everett doesn't make me any more likely to want to allow for us to not have oversight or transparency about how things are done that impact the city of Boston. And so if the question that I've heard repeatedly here is, we have partnerships with these outside small municipalities, and if you do this, if you make it so that we have to have some transparency or oversight in the city of Boston, then what happens to Quincy? I'm concerned about what happens to the city of Boston. I'm concerned about how we do this. And frankly, from where I'm at, Q and R are not amendments that I would want in here. I think we spent a lot amount of time on this. I think it's been frustrating to me to see that folks came here without an understanding of the actual document itself and the exigency that it already provides for. And so in terms of time, because this is, just to be clear, the 3rd working session that we've had here, I would love it if we could just keep moving on this moving forward, because these kinds of additions with blanket exceptions, because it may or may not impact Quincy, like this stuff, this actually for me is not even worth discussing in the context that we've discussed it. And I appreciate that folks have brought it up, but I do think that folks have handled it. So thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair. for the instances in which you have very deftly brought folks back to the parts of this ordinance. I appreciate your in-depth understanding of this ordinance, and I really do applaud it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Superintendent Donovan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just try to make 2 quick points. So if you paid attention to the news accounts, both locally and across the country at all, you'll see that across the country, murder and violent crime has increased dramatically, just about everywhere across the country, except for in the city of Boston. We have had significant decreases in murder and violent crime. And, there's a number of reasons for that, and it's not all just the police department, but I think we have had a significant impact on that, and technology certainly comes into play there, as does our partnerships with our surrounding communities, because I will tell you most definitely that what goes on in Quincy and what goes on in Cambridge and what goes on in Boston most definitely impacts all of the surrounding communities. It's not contained to one community or the other. It goes back and forth. It goes across. It's not limited. We can't have the success that we have without all of our local partners working hand in hand. And we just have to keep that. We have to keep a balance here, is what I'm trying to. There has to be a balance between surveillance oversight and maintaining public safety. I'm not saying we can't have surveillance oversight. We just have to maintain a balance of the two, where we protect citizens' rights not to be unduly surveilled, but yet we're protecting public safety. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of that right now. And I'd hate to see that adversely affected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before we go into responding about this particular exemption, I kind of want to land the plane on R and S. I think those are the last 2 blue edits. So R, I'm just feeling from the lead sponsors that the concerns that this exemption is just too broad. It's just too broad, and it's for the entire office to have an outright exemption for goods and services purchased as part of its fiduciary role. And I do hear the office's concerns that they don't want to be, purchasing one thing and then be told by the city council after the fact that that's something that they don't approve of in terms of being a use. I have heard that you said, and I've heard you when you said this is a city department ordinance, but you have a regional reach and a regional backup system. And I think that is, I understand that as a concern, but to get an outright full on 100% exemption for a regional reach, I don't hear from the lead sponsors, and I myself don't understand why that is necessary. You have in the exigent circumstances that you are obviously providing mutual aid for, where you may have to require something, and we've allowed for that and use, and for as long as you need it, honestly, as until the exigent circumstances are over. So if you need to hurry and get something, you can, to protect people, and just simply submit a report after the fact. So I don't know, and obviously if it's even to protect people regionally. So I don't know that this exemption, I don't think it makes sense with the spirit of this ordinance. And I think we would all be happy to entertain, if you think you could thread the needle a little better, something, but I don't know that as written, this amendment's going to work. Just moving on to S, because I did want to leave some time for additional things that we don't know that people have, if that's okay, Councilor Arroyo. And I'm just going to quickly move on to S, technology used to track equipment and vehicles, just being an outright exemption. I'm assuming that's for OE. Who suggested that? I'm assuming as an exemption.
Hi, this is Laura Siegel from Boston EMS. We just want the ability to track our own medical equipment and ambulances and understand that surveillance technology can be used for the purpose of tracking an individual department's equipment. And I'm not sure, if that needs to be more specific, but took the ordinance to specifically focus on the tracking of people and wanted the ability to obviously track our own assets outside of that.
Would you, to the lead sponsors then, technology used to track Boston Health Commission equipment and vehicles? This is to the lead sponsor and the ACLU and other folks. Does that thread the needle?
Sure, yeah, as long as the language is specific, because any vehicles, that would be a problem. But city-owned fleets or Boston Public Health Commission fleets, we don't object to that. That's fine.
Yeah, so with narrow language, I don't think this is a problem.
Okay. All right, so I know Superintendent had his hand up on the last one, then I'm also opening this up for other folks as well. I think the chief, she started earlier, and I see also, it's very confusing to me because it says Nancy Anderson as the person who's speaking, to come in and be able to speak on OEM and make kind of a free fall of suggestions and concerns at this point. This is open to all the city departments, do it. And if we could use the next half hour or so to do this, I'd really appreciate that. So go back to OEM.
Very briefly, ma'am, thank you. And I apologize for the confusion. We've had some technology over here. I want to thank you for your posture and helping us to work towards the middle. I also want to appreciate the other contributors and Kate for offering some perspective to help frame thinking. We will have an internal conversation around R with some others to see if we can come up with some language. But I do just want to offer that, we come to the table as civil servants as well, with a common belief of service delivery to our and accountability and transparency to our respective constituents. And again, we endeavor to work as hard as anyone else to understand the provisions of the law, but I'd like to think that these working sessions are also beneficial in having conversation and having context. So I just want to mention we work equally as hard to be as informed, but also use these sessions to better understand and work collaboratively to come up with realistic solutions. So thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. So anybody else have suggestions? If they just raise their hands. Two participants raise their hands. I'm just not seeing them on my screen. I have Superintendent Donovan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Are we just still talking about Q and R? Have we moved on to the general anywhere in the ordinance?
It's anywhere.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I just have one more thing. We've talked about this before, but I'm still just I'm a little confused regarding section 16-63.4, section A1C. That's where a student is in possession of firearms and ammunition. So regarding the student reports. So I know we had a discussion about dangerous weapons, and I'm disappointed not to see anything in there about dangerous weapons. Because what are the school police officers to do when, there's a state statute, 26910 that, has a whole list of dangerous weapons, from stilettos, daggers, nunchucks, blackjacks, metallic knuckles. So what happens when a student is in school and found to be in possession of a dangerous weapon? What is the school officer to do about that? I don't,
Could you go to the exact section? Are you talking about the ammunition?
So it's 16-63.4, and then it's section A, small a, numeral 1, capital C.
This is on page 12. If that helps.
So this was, a topic of discussion before, and was only firearms. We added ammunition, which I'm extremely grateful for, and the department is grateful for. But yet, we had a discussion about dangerous weapons, yet there is no provision for a student report being created if a student is found in possession of a dangerous weapon. And, a dangerous weapon, I think it was discussed, anything can be used as a dangerous weapon, pretty much, but there are specific weapons that are outright just the possession of, never mind if you use it, just the possession of is against the law. And, in my experience, when you find people in possession of those types of weapons, it's of, there's a concern there. There's something else going on. We're not talking about the kid with the pocket knife either. These are a lot of these weapons are very inherently dangerous. They have no other purpose other than to, they're not used for whittling wood. They're used to hurt people. So, what is a school police officer to do when they find a student in possession of one of these weapons that is listed in Mass General Law 26910? How are they going to handle it?
If I might, Chair, this section addresses merely the creation of student reports, does not say anything about what a school police officer might do with respect to seizing a dangerous weapon from a student. This is about the creation of reports that can, as we've seen in the past, make their way into, for example, the hands of ICE. And so, nothing in this language says that if a police officer at a Boston Public School encounters a student with nunchucks, that they can't seize those nunchucks.
So I think that's where the difficulty, I think we had Chief Coakley again. The first thing I wanted to say is that our name has changed. So we're gonna have to do some edits. Since the last meeting, we had some union agreements. So we are now safety specialists. We no longer have our police powers. Therein lies the situation of seizing dangerous weapons. We don't have the capacity to seize dangerous weapons any longer. So I thought we were going to come up with a list of items that were going to be mentioned in this document that we would have to, that we would be able to do formal reports and have Boston Police actually seize those items, like nunchucks, like tasers, like daggers, some of those items, not to be facetious, but that have been confiscated more recently from students in school.
So can I just ask a question to that? Because I'm a little bit confused. So under the new agreement, if a school safety resource officer, or whatever the new title is, sees a student with a dagger, they have to go to their office, write a report, and that's how that gets dealt with now? Is that what I'm being told? They can't just take the dagger or deal with that situation? They have to let the student go about their day and write a report? I'm trying to figure out what you're saying school security officers do now.
No, right now there is a dilemma with that. What we want to do is, in confiscating those, we don't have a means to hold those items. We wanted those items to be turned over to Boston Police. And turning those items over to Boston Police, there has to be a police report generated for those items.
So you're saying that in order for, so I'm just trying, because you started by saying that they can't even confiscate these items. So you're saying when they confiscate these items, which they can still do, they now have to write a report in order for them to give that to the BPD? That item?
That's the dilemma we're having right now, yes, because we don't have a ability to store those items or keep those.
Why don't you have the ability to keep a dagger? What would you do? Give it back to the student? Like, what? I'm just trying to figure out exactly what you're saying is the process now. You're saying you can confiscate a dagger, but you can't keep it. You got to give it back to the student.
No, counselor, we would not give it back to the student, but we want to have a formal process of turning those items over to police. We don't have our police powers anymore. We don't have a storage facility for daggers, for tasers. We would want to have those items turned over to Boston Police, the proper authorities.
And you can't just turn it into the Boston Police. You have to have a formal report to do that. You can't just bring over the same way that, say, if somebody had opiates in their house and they wanted to drop them in a Dropbox, can drop them in the Dropbox. You can't bring these items to BPD and say, this is an item we confiscated. Can you please remove this item without having a written report? Is that what you're saying?
In our process right now, no, that is not the process. We can't just turn those items over to Boston Police without a report.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand. So basically, you're saying that the only way in which you can dispose of confiscated goods like that is if you write a school police report that includes the name of the person from which you confiscated it and all of these other details. Is that basically?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And is that new? Is that a new thing from the changes that you just said, or is that something that's always existed?
No, previously it wasn't an issue because we could write Boston Police reports. So in writing those Boston Police reports, we would write the fact that we confiscated that item, mention who we received that item for, and then that item could be turned over to Boston Police. Now we can't do Boston Police. Now we don't have access to Boston Police reports.
So now what it sounds like is BPS, the Boston Public Schools system, needs a method to actually, so that you don't have to go to BPD, you can just remove or have some method of removing these things from BPS possession that doesn't involve BPD, a standalone one, the same way BPD receives these things. You need some similar unit if that's going to be the case. What it sounds like could be a potential fix.
In general, yes, we would appreciate a partnership in which BPD could still confiscate those items and generate a report. And those are some of the things that we're still working on right now, Counselor.
Okay, thank you. And please keep me up to date on that, because this is obviously when did this happen? Last week?
I know we lost our powers July 1st, but we just really transitioned over within the last month or so.
Okay.
I bring the conversation back to the original points by the superintendent. You mentioned 269.10, Superintendent?
Yes, Madam Chair, 26910, it's subsection, it's like small a or small b, I think it is. There's a whole series of weapons listed in there that are possession in and of itself. There is a crime. You know, a lot of them are knife type weapons, dirk knife, stiletto, dagger, you know, switchblades, you know.
So you just want us to list that as what should be in the report?
Well, I mean, that if
This
that's
is
the
just
case.
about a report.
Pardon me?
This is just about the report.
Well, it's.
You
so
want
the way
those,
I read,
let
the way
me
I
just
read
be
the
clear,
ordinance-
I'm trying to make sure. Do you just want, because this now it says student reports shall only be created when, and it gives A, B, C, D, and you just want to add in and items found under 269.10, that's when there should be a student report too, or?
That would be fine with the police department, yes.
Okay, Counselor Arroyo and Cade?
Fine with me.
Yeah, as long as there's a citation to the state statute. The concern that the advocates have is
Of course.
the phrase dangerous weapon can be, you know,
foot.
your mileage might vary, right?
No, that's agreed. I mean, like I said, a lot of things can be a dangerous weapon when used as such, but possession of, no. But these are, so.
Okay.
That would
So
be,
those-
that would be wonderful.
I'm fine with that. If that solves the issue for everybody, just a direct citation to the dangerous weapons definition, that's fine.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Now, anybody else have other suggestions, questions for any part of the ordinance? Speak now. Raise your hand. Going once. If you have suggested language and you want to send it to me later, that's fine too. I just know that it becomes part of the public record and it will be shared with all stakeholders. That's okay. That's what we want.
That's fine. We'll be sending some edited language over as well, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Chair, might I ask, sorry, if there could be some kind of a deadline for that language, only because we're coming up against the end of the session soon with holidays and everything.
Chief, how soon do you think you can get the language to us?
We're just doing we just had some transition from our legal department. Usually Kathy Lazant was here with us, if you guys remember, but we just have a new attorney, Lisa Mackey. So unfortunately, she didn't get an invite to this, but I will. I'm going to make her abreast of it, and we'll get some language to you by next week.
Okay, good. Councilor Arroyo?
I just want to thank you, Chief Coakley, on that. And then I guess there was some very basic, we got to fix the terminology because it's no longer school police officers. So we'll do that. We'll handle that. And if you keep me updated on sort of, if there's a possibility for somebody to send me a summary on sort of what these changes to your functionalities in schools are, because some of these things I think we can fix in different ways, in other ways that can fix some of these gaps, unless that's something that's already happening, Chief Coakley.
I think it's in the process, so definitely we're still considering guidance on it and moving forward.
If I may let folks know also, one thing that we had discussed extensively, but wanted to bring it back to center. We know, and by that I mean everybody on this Zoom and interested stakeholders know that there's no permanent way to deal with surveillance. And just to remind people, that's why there's also a working group in here, because we're going to find what does and doesn't work. We're going to find that things need to be tweaked throughout, as the chief is going to show, and as names change. This happens even in the middle of our working sessions. So just to remind people that we establish a working group for that reason. Technology will change, departments' names will change, how we acquire things will change. And so this working group is also supposed to help make sure that we're clear and adjusting appropriately. So if we don't have every single edit right in and now, it's not as though this is drop dead and never can be changed again. In fact, this ordinance creates a process for change and process for recommendations going forward. And that I hope that comforts many of the people on the Zoom who are concerned about, what might be given up permanently. Or it doesn't. Either way, I'm going to go ahead and call this this working session. I'll look forward to any recommendation, the language next week. Thank you all for coming on. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I look like I have like a blanket on.